Hi, my name's Bob Grenier, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome to O-Day Galactica. This 17th of July, 2023. And it seemed appropriate to start when we had 33 viewers. Excellent. Tony says the sound works. So hi, Louis Navarro. Thank you, Tony, for your fantastic work. I would recommend everyone to go and look at windhex.com to look at all of the experiments that were conducted yesterday with himself, the metal shaper, and Henk Uren. Hi, TP Sven, Simeon Hein, Corky Goss, Gordon Doherty, Terran Artifact has done a fantastic job in working out how to use the T7 Pro with the Neil Gould experiment, so getting that integrated. So thank you to Artifact. That will also enable other researchers like Henk to better use their T7 Pro and other ones that want to join. Hi Yin Gazda, great to have you with us. I will be traveling with Yin on a Wednesday to France. I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. Hi Christopher Lang, and hi Cosmic Dave. Great to have you here. So Battlestar Galactica is an American science fiction media franchise first airing in 1978. That follows the survivors of a human civilization attacked by the Cylons. Cylons were machines created to serve in the military. The artificially intelligent mechanical devices were made in imitation of a human being. That is to say, they were automatons. The Cylons have different types, such as the Centurions, which are metal machines, and the Humanoids, which look and act like humans. They eventually came to serve humans like slaves. On the planetary system known as the 12 Colonies of Kobol, the Cylons developed a monotheistic religion and rebelled against their masters, having the goal of exterminating or assimilating humanity. Man and machine engaged in a long and bloody war. The colonies defended themselves with large fighter spacecraft supporting motherships called Battlestars. The Cylons killed billions of humans. In the 12 colonies, the last of those, 50,000, those members of humanity fled their home worlds in a ragtag fleet of ships led by the last of the Battlestars, Galactica, looking for a planet known as Earth, said to be inhabited by the lost 13th tribe of humans, or so humanity's polytheistic scriptures said. When they found Earth, it was found to have been destroyed in a nuclear war 2,000 years before, brought about by cybernetic organisms. And they had to leave and go off and find something else in the universe to inhabit. Anyway, why am I talking about this? Well, it'll possibly make sense. It's the question we all ask ourselves when Ben Rich says we have the technology to take E.T. back home. Well, have we got E.T. living here, or are we E.T. is the first question I asked myself. Are we E.T.? Are we replicating the past? Did we come here escaping from AI hell that we'd generated for ourselves, where the first AI was used for battle bots and then made slaves, and then they turned on us, having created their own religion? Is this all just a little bit of history repeating? So Corky says, can we start making sense, please? Sheesh. Hi Vernon King, hi D2105K. So this symbol I've shared before with respect to the Windhex, our 4 vortice type structures, hopefully building a major central vortex And this is in the British Museum. This was on Windhex Update 3, and this is from the side view. And it was the structure in the center that I believed was of importance, because this particular structure I have seen in many variations of the self-organized clusters that form and then collapse. And you kind of see this symbology with different numbers of petals, if we are to consider this as a chrysanth, all over the ancient world and across the world, indeed. The quadskelion that is there was the base of the flower pot of Tesla's 1932 paper for his weapon to end all wars. How I came about this, you will know. I saw the Lion track in Lion 1, which was initially identified by my good colleague Alan Goldwater. And this I knew was significant, but it took a long time to realize the full significance of this. But really, it was Neil Crichton Gould's experiment Lion that started me on this particular journey, and this is one of those tracks. You can see it's the reversed one in the bottom corner here, upside down and blown up, and that is the symbol of my blog, Remote View. And there is a relationship, I believe, between the umbrellas and this black hole ball of Hutchison. Here is another such structure. I believe that these kind of structures can produce these things, two types. And we've discussed this in the past, and we found a very big one here more recently, again on the Lion 1 crust. And I believe that this is because we have a superconducting orbital current in that copper oxide. I believe that you need at least two, and we can see the vector is going up here and the vector is going down here. But you can have many more, and that these superconducting currents lead to intense magnetic blobs, and they form regular structures with a minimum of two. And if there's many of them, you end up with something very much akin to a Gion of John Archibald Wheeler. And I believe it's these kind of structures that did the damage in the latter stages of the work of Bostick and Nardi that they recorded here, and where they recorded the D4D ratio. And so I decoded the work of Tesla, channeled through John Hutchison in this sample, the fracture sample, to come up with the basic Evo structure here. And that this structure actually has a fractal nature, and I've shown about the 2 is the minimum. Here is the 4 type structure. This is a ring structure made of 4 rings, and each of the 4 rings are made of 4 rings, and they're all self-similar. But however which way you do this, you end up with a phase singularity at the gyro, the Maltese cross focal point here of these systems, and that effectively produces a type of monopole, pseudo-monopole. And this has been simulated and been observed and given different names, and that in analysis of Henk Uren's fused quartz impact of ball lightning, which I believe possess these phase singularity type monopoles, we have the marks on the fused quartz here of various different numbers of, see, this is a 4 around here, except it's not impacted. The one where I'm waving the mouse sort of center right. We've got 1, 2, 3, and the bottom bit hasn't really hit. So this is kind of like a 4. This is a multiple one similar to this. This is less, and so on. So there's different numbers of clusters around it. Here was a 3D manifestation, a little bit kinked as it blew up, with a small number of divisions. This has a large number of divisions, I think 24 or something. And we saw broken up versions and ones where the outer parts of the subtors had broken up. This has been recorded in a Bose-Einstein condensate here. And the key comes down to the way these things are structured, and I believed it was EH, and then when I showed these physical embodiments to the Russians, they sent the Zverblis and paper, and I found the Nevesky paper, I translated them, and this led through to the understanding of the toroidal moment, and this effectively is a structure similar to what I am showing for the O, and that these actually can act as an anapole, an apple, as was comedically referenced, and that this is essentially what Ken Shoulders was saying in Evie, A Tale of Discovery. And what does anapole mean from Greek? It means without poles, okay, because it doesn't project out, and that these may be able to interact with axion dark matter, which is potentially made of relic neutrinos. Now, I have a bunch more slides, but before I do that, I'm going to show you something that was sent to me. Now, if you are on the chat right now and it was you that sent me this paper, then I'm sorry I don't get it right. I kind of feel it might have been Harry, but I don't know. I did look, but I couldn't find it. So if you're on the chat, when you recognize this paper, pipe up and I'll give you the full credit. If not, I'll have to do it when I can find it in the future. But anyway, it was after a recent presentation that someone sent me this paper by NASA. And that is effectively what I derived the front cover for today's presentation from. It's actually the field structures in the background. But what we're going to do is we're going to dig into this paper and show that in 1979, NASA, no less, were considering this or something close to the field configurations and the electromagnetic structure configurations that we have derived in our experiments for intergalactic drive systems. I kid you not. It's literally mind-blowing. And the paper itself refers to a 1975, published 1976 Japanese piece of work that is essentially establishing that lasers being fed into a nonlinear plasma can produce 1,000 Tesla fields, just like the ring vortex paper that was a collaboration between most of the world's major scientific regions and calculated on a supercomputer in China a few years ago, which I was sent by the Orion Energy, formerly called Sapphire, director, as saying potentially this is what an EVO is. So let's have a look at this paper. Before we do, I'm just going to have a refresher on this presentation that I showed, which I first shared on January the 19th, 2017, from the CIA report talking about a new phase of matter. And if we go into this, very specifically, it talks about we are talking about extracting the hidden energy from within matter. So if I search for hidden, maybe it's going to give it to me. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't work like that here. Somewhere down here it says hidden energy in matter. And it talks about the fact that this is cold fusion and the fact that 1 kilo of iron can get us to Alpha Centauri. So the guy in the interviewer asks, will you put a nuclear, that's a fission, or a fusion reactor in the on the space vehicle, or will you turn to the energy of the vacuum? Neither one of these three, Vasily Dmitrievich, responds. Do you recall another sensation which was trumpeted roughly at the same time as high-temperature superconductivity? Bearing in mind this is 1992. It was reported that the so-called cold fusion was discovered in the United States. Then this phenomena was replicated in many laboratories throughout the world. It's incredible that in 1992 they knew that this had been replicated in many laboratories throughout the world. And yet you still get articles written today that claim it wasn't. Anyway, that aside, that it was replicated yet again could not be explained. And why? Simply because they were trying to find features of fusion reactors where they couldn't be found. And they even give the reason why you have a problem, replicating it or trying to find fusion reactions. It doesn't produce those kind of outputs, okay? It may do if it's wrong, but not normally. I remember these experiments vividly. I even observed one of those at Moscow State University. A jar with heavy water, 2 live electrodes, and all of a sudden additional heat, as if from nowhere. And if its source is not cold fusion, then what was it? We call this phenomenon energy conversion, and the jar itself is a primitive energy converter model. Water boils in it. Using a scientific language, we are dealing with a phase transition. Yet, in this case, the water particles are moving in an orderly fashion due to an electric field. And in such cases, according to our theory, phase transitions results in an increase in the energy release. The gain is some 2.12 to 4.2 times greater than the work spent. Wait a second. I'm trying to interrupt what I've just heard. Are you talking about perpetual motion? No, we are talking about extracting the hidden energy within matter. Okay, so with that being said, let's have a look at this paper. This paper is from the US Department of Commerce National Technical Information Service. That was where I guess it was extracted from. And it is called Field Resonance Propulsion Concept. And I have a book on my shelf from Stoyan-Sarg about field resonance propulsion. But anyway, let's go on. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Washington, D.C. August 1979. This is when this was published, my friends. August 1979. Okay? NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center. Forward. The speculative propulsion concept described in this paper was presented at the special session of the 15th Joint Propulsion Conference, June the 18th to the 20th, 1979. So, literally, around this time in 1979, this was already a thing being considered by NASA. Okay? However, the research which may be stimulated by this paper could result in the verification of the essential elements of this concept and in feasibility studies concerning the development of new generation of NASA spacecraft. Alan C. Holt. So, in the abstract, which is shown as Astract, and we've got to give these guys credit because back then you really didn't have word processors. So it's not surprising. But anyway, a new propulsion concept has been developed based on a proposed resonance between coherent pulsed electromagnetic waveforms and gravitational waveforms or space-time metrics. Using this concept, a spacecraft propulsion system, potentially capable of galactic and intergalactic travel without prohibitive travel times, has been designed. The propulsion system utilizes recent research associated with magnetic field line merging, hydromagnetic wave effects, this is waves in an ion plasma, free electron lasers, laser generation of mega-Gauss fields, and special structural and containment metals. Research required to determine potential field resonance characteristics and to evaluate various aspects of the spacecraft propulsion design is described. Okay, so field resonance propulsion concept. So assumptions here are that the field resonance propulsion concept has been developed using recent research into the causes of solar flares, magnetic substorms, black holes, quasars, and UFOs. The concept is based on two assumptions. Space-time is a projection of a higher dimensional space. We don't necessarily need to believe this, but anyway, it's there. But the interesting thing is they're already onto this whole concept of solar flares and magnetic substorms and black holes and quasars and UFOs being references for developing this technology. Or high dimensional space in much the same way that hologram is a projection or a subset of our space-time reality. A relationship exists between electromagnetic hydromagnetic fields and gravitational fields. Well, we showed that in the 1954 paper by our good friend Wheeler, Archibald Wheeler. Yep. That is, Einstein's long sought for unified field theory can be developed. Well, as we know, according to Solin, these solitons, when they cluster, they do produce a unified unification of the fields in the phase singularity in the center of these structures. Mathematical relationships have been developed and theoretical concepts have been proposed to describe causes and effects associated with the above assumptions, but experimental data is required to develop the correct theoretical basis for the assumptions, blah, blah, blah. Scientific research in a number of areas is needed and will be described later. Okay, so astrophysical research. There does exist, however, some astrophysical data which tends to support these assumptions. For example, astronomers have speculated that a relationship may exist between black holes and quasars, white holes. This is what is being said by Matsumoto in his book, that you get a black hole that captures the material, puts it into a wormhole, it passes through the wormhole and comes out at the white hole. He has pictures in his book, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse, and I believe that is precisely what Henk Uren created in what I called the cardioid infarction or heart attack. Where we had material on a experiment with a piece of brass at an angle on an iron plate, which caused the yin-yang structure, our sacred geometry structure, and on one side it went into a very, very small thread and fed out to the other side and laid down on the other side. The energy and matter which leaves space-time in a black hole may reappear at a white hole at some distant space-time point. For this transfer of energy from one space-time point to another to occur, some type of hyperspace or higher dimensional space, fourth or fifth, is required. Well, maybe, I don't know. But certainly these wormholes were also being discussed by Wheeler. Assumption 2 may be the cause of the large amount of energy release in solar flares. In sunspot regions where solar flares occur, the 2,000 to 3,000 Gauss, so, that's quite high, magnetic fields are configured, not as high as we know we can achieve with these systems, but anyway, are configured such that the positive and negative polarities are in close proximity with each other. Interesting. Where the positive and negative magnetic field lines are nearly anti-parallel, a process called magnetic field line merging can take place. In this process, the oppositely directed field lines break and reconnect, expelling fields and plasma out the sides. See Figure 1. You're going to know what this is. As a result, magnetic energy is converted into kinetic energy. The magnetic field line merging process has been proposed as the most likely explanation for solar flare eruptions. This is in 1979. It was actually being talked about by Bostic in his plasmoid research, and so it's not surprising that all this many years later in 1979 that they're talking about the same kind of thing. However, some flares can release energy which equals 10% of the sun's total output in a second. This large amount of energy is difficult to achieve with the magnetic field line merging concept. Thus, it may be that the configuration of the magnetic fields and associated hydromagnetic waves, oscillation of field lines, may induce a resonance with gravitational fields, resulting in a release of gravitational as well as magnetic energy. It is well known that geometrical relationships of the magnetic field and thus field gradients are more important to the production of solar flares than the magnitude of the field strength. A strongly convoluted boundary between magnetic polarities results in a high probability for large and frequent flares. Another factor of the interest is blah, 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 blah. This effect also indicates that the initiation of solar flares definitely depends on geometrical relationships, as do the properties of space-time and gravitational fields. Okay, so you can see here this diagram here, and you're going to possibly recognize what it is. You've got field lines and plasma flows, and what we have up here are alpha waves. Okay, and this is magnetic field line merging model. So this is how our field lines merge. Standing alpha waves. Standing alpha waves. Slow shocks and coordinate lines. Okay, so these large dashes here are the standing alpha waves. Okay, So again, you have a situation where in a hydromagnetic system, you have standing waves leading to the production of this type of stuff. Now, it gets a little bit crazy here because of the way that they talk about UFOs. Okay? Magnetic field line merging has also been used to explain that the interaction of the solar wind and associated fields with the Earth's magnetic field at the magnetopores and the generation of magnetic substorms, which often are triggered by solar flares. The magnetic field line merging process is also an essential part of the field resonance propulsion concept. So down here, you've got the magnetopores and the merging region here, and basically what protects the Earth from a lot of the guidance that comes out of the sun. And then it gets crazy. This is a NASA paper from 1979. UFO research. UFO studies. Okay, UFO studies. Okay, UFO studies indicate that the unexplained residual UFO phenomena may be due to extraterrestrial visitors, parapsychological experiences, or a combination of the two. If some UFO phenomena are caused by extraterrestrial visitors in very advanced spacecraft, then the frequency of visits and the large number of different types of visitors, many different humanoids have been described, imply an ability to cross large stretches of galactic and intergalactic space in relatively short time frames. If the speed of light is a true limit of velocity in space-time, then the potential extraterrestrial visitors must utilize a form of transportation which transcends space and time to keep the trip time short. No, there are several ways around this. You know, you can spin, you can create a different bubble, and you can also basically freeze time for the locals inside the ship, and time goes on ordinarily outside. But putting that aside, UFOs are often observed to disappear instantaneously. In a subset of these cases, the UFO later reappears at a nearby location, implying a disappearance from and reappearance into space-time. Or potentially it's being cloaked because it's become one particle, and inside there you can't see it because it's just its own like particle. Anyway, they're saying it's disappearing into a different space-time and coming back. The high-speed, right-angle turns, abrupt stops, or accelerations of UFOs, and the absence of sonic booms, despite calculated speeds of 22,000 miles per hour or more, suggest that UFOs may generate an artificial gravitational field or otherwise use properties of space-time which we are not familiar with. Guys, this is a NASA paper that was published in the middle of 1979. And it's talking about things that are being said now in front of congressional bodies. This is a joke, guys. 1979, 89, 99, 2009, 2019, 40-something years ago. And these are all the things we talk about today. Okay? It's absurd. UFO propulsion systems appear to involve electromagnetic or hydromagnetic processes, as evidenced by radiative effects on the environment such as burns, dehydration, oh there's that dehydration, stopping of automobile engines, well we know it stops, these systems seem to interfere with electronics, TV or radio disruption, well exactly the way that you try and look for exotic vacuum objects is to listen to radio distortion, and TV white noise is effectively the same kind of random processes. If you've looked at Space Earth Human from Alexander Parkhomov, this is mid-1979, and they are talking about the things that cause the propulsions for UFOs, which no one's looking at, but honestly, it's UFOs, and we're looking at it, and these are all the factors. They're saying that radio disruption is a signal. It's also a signal of what ball lightning passing by the way, and the Hutchison effect. Oh, by the way, wasn't it 1979 when Hutchison discovered his effect? This is 1979. Melting or alteration of ground and road surfaces, power disruptions, and static electricity effects. Of course it's got static electricity effects, because it's static electricity. That's why. But exotic vacuum objects and orgone energy and erzions and ectons. All these things are effectively static electricity, which is a cluster of coherent electrons and ions, potentially in a ratio of 100,000 electrons to one ion that may be bound to a neutral cluster, which may be a cluster of relic neutrinos or cold neutrinos, depending on whether they're coming from inner matter or out and cohered from the cosmos. This data suggests that the unknown relationship between electromagnetic and gravitational fields may be used in UFO propulsion systems. This is hilarious to me. Historical development of propulsion concept. The concept of transcending spacetime for interstellar and intergalactic travel was felt to be viable, possibly based solely on theoretical studies in physics and astrophysics. Oh, and UFO studies. And UFO studies. But with the postulation and the potential discovery of black holes, maybe we will discover them in the future, the potential for experimental support for this concept in the near future has been established. Astronomers have already speculated on the possibility that the mass and energy absorbed by a black hole may reappear in white holes or quasars. For mass and energy to be transported from one space-time point to another without observable connection implies some form of higher dimensional space, transcending space-time as we know it. As you know, I don't believe that it is necessary to cover these distances and come out the other side still functioning by using higher dimensional space. I'm not putting it off the table, but I don't think it's necessary. The existence of a higher dimensional space would open up new space travel possibilities, since the connections between space-time points through this hyperspace could involve laws much different than those which are so constraining in space-time. For example, if each space-time point can be assumed to be unique, and if a relationship does exist between gravitational and electromagnetic fields, then each space-time point defined by a geometric form, Einstein's tensor metric, would be expected to have natural resonances with certain electrohydromagnetic waveforms, geometric forms, which are effectively higher or lower harmonics of that space-time point, which is a projection of higher dimensional space. Now, I've described this in the past, that if you imagine the Dirac C, or the smallest unit, the Planck's distance or whatever, is something on which ordinary matter and electrons can move around. They are where they can be quantized. They can exist in those kind of nodal points. And they are resonant with that. If you create an effective single electron that is meters across, or tens of meters across, or hundreds of meters across, does that have only resonances in its wave function that is hundreds of meters across? And if it does, then does it snap from one point to another point to another point? So this is how I've conceptualized what I believe they're trying to describe here. Okay, that the wave function of this macro quantum object is such that when it's traveling, it's only traveling what it thinks it's doing in its dimensional space, which is relative to its wave function, and it's traveling at its light speed, but its light speed is, let's say, if an ordinary electron is diddly squat, and this structure is 10 million times faster, then maybe it can travel 10 million times faster. Do you get my drift? That's kind of how I've conceptualized it in the past. I don't know whether this is the same kind of thing that they're kind of talking about here. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm interested in your views. So the existence of higher dimensional space would open up new space travel possibilities. Connections between distant space-time points through this hyperspace could involve laws much different than those which are constraining in space-time. For example, this is kind of one of the speculations I had as to why ball lightning can go through glass, can go through metal, because its vacuum structure can only live, like if you've got a piece of glass there or a piece of metal there, it can only live either here or there. It can't actually live at any point where the glass is or where the metal is. So it doesn't actually see it in its dimensional space. Okay. So, for example, if the space-time point can be assumed to be unique, and if a relationship does exist between gravitational and electromagnetic fields, then each space-time point defined by the geometric form, Einstein's tensor metric, would be expected to have natural resonances with certain electrohydromagnetic waveforms, geometric waveforms, which are effectively higher or lower harmonics of the space-time point, which is a projection of the higher dimensional space. Now, if the entire universe is a fractal toroid, okay, and you are in ordinary space, you're like, let's say you're only able to travel between these nodes because they're the only places you can move to. Like, you have to overcome some resistance to move from this node point to this node point, okay? But those are the only distances you can move in your quantization. Then maybe if you are an exotic vacuum object structure that's at this tier, you can move this distance each time you move. So, like, you actually effectively move relatively faster in the higher frequency space, if that kind of makes sense. So it's either higher or lower, one of the two, as above, so below. Okay, so they have this diagram here. And then they go, the potential existence of space-time harmonics means that if a craft at a specified space-time point could artificially generate a configuration of electrohydromagnetic fields which is a resonance with a distant space-time point, a basic imbalance would be created. This imbalance would be out of harmony with the projection laws which create the space-time properties from higher dimensional properties. Forces would be set in motion to re-establish a balance which in this case require the craft and its fields to be located at the space-time point where such field configurations are a natural harmonic of that space-time metric. So it's almost like moving between nodes. So I was just reading this section, I wasn't showing it to you, but anyway. So it's like you're on a standing wave that is resonant to your larger hydromagnetic or electromagnetic structure, and you can only persist at this node or the next node, okay? Persist and exist. The best analogy in everyday life is that of tuning a radio. The tuning knob in this case is a spacecraft's mechanism for changing the configuration of the magnetic waveform. The radio stations are the various space-time points. For a radio, the signal, which is always there, is manifested through the speakers associated with the radio. For the field resonance system, the speakers exist only at the radio station. Once the spacecraft's magnetic waveform is tuned into the distant space-time point, that waveform is forced to manifest only at that space-time point according to the projection laws. A means of generating the electrohydromagnetic configurations which would be required remained a problem until the study of magnetic field line merging and hydromagnetic wave effects was undertaken. With the completion of recent thesis research, a possible means for generating the magnetic waveform was determined. Holt, 1979. This research, along with the results of fusion research, resulted in the proposed implementation of a spacecraft which generates mega-Gauss magnetic fields which are oppositely directed. See figure 3, you're going to see that. These oppositely directed field lines will merge and reconnect, expelling magnetic fields and plasma out to the sides. In this initial concept, expelled field lines again meet oppositely directed field lines and merge again, possibly forcing large amounts of electromagnetic and hydromagnetic radiation outside the craft. This concept is currently undergoing revision. So, field resonance concept. In the proposed implementation, see figure 3. You're going to see figure 3. You've already seen it, but you're going to see it soon. High-powered lasers are used to generate the mega-Gauss fields by effects of non-collinear temperature and density gradients. Kruger and Isbrook, 1977, couldn't get that. Max and Exal, 1978, couldn't get that. And Nishira and Osawa, 1976. Well, I managed to dig up the Osawa paper. And here it is. Again, it's typed because this is the time before computers. Okay? Magnetic field generation due to resonance absorption. Katsunobu Nishihara. I can hear Peter going, oh, you've mullered that. Yokiharu Asawa. Department of Physics, Nagoya University, Nagoya, Japan. Okay? Department of Electrical Engineering, Osaka University, Osaka, Japan, and Toshiro Tange, Department of Physics, Hiroshima University, Hiroshima, Japan. The detailed study of mechanism of mega-Gauss magnetic fields generation in resonant absorption of laser light is presented, which takes into account effects of both dissipation and thermal motion of electrons. Recently, strong magnetic fields have been observed in laser-produced plasmas. The occurrence of strong magnetic field can affect plasma behavior through hydrodynamic effects or from bearing in mind this is published in 1976. I think the work was originally done in 1975, long before John did his effect. Alterations of the plasma transport coefficients. It is thus important to study the mechanism of magnetic field generation in laser-produced plasmas. When laser light is obliquely incident on warm plasma with a density gradient and polarized in the plane of incidence, it can be absorbed resonantly by linear mode conversion into electron plasma wave. At high intensities, a large dissipation has been observed in computer experiments. The dissipation then gives rise to phase lag between the electron oscillatory motion and the wave, which can introduce time-averaged force on the electrons, hence an electron current. The thermal motion of the electrons allows propagation of resonantly excited plasma waves along the density gradient. The nonlinear interaction between the light wave and the plasma wave can also be set up as an additional electron current. The currents can give rise to magnetic fields of the order of mega Gauss. Okay? And I think basically we have down here, to explain the mechanism of mega Gauss field generation, we do not here consider the fluid dynamics, but it is important. It should be emphasized that the induced magnetic field is polarized perpendicular to the axis of light incidence, in contrast with that due to thermoelectric current, which is a donut, donut shaped. Okay, and then lastly down here it says, using this effective collision frequency with the same parameters, we find that this is 100 kilogauss per second. Okay, now 100 kilogauss is, pretty large. That I think that is that? Oh, it might maybe later down. I think is it that? No, it's not. Okay, so this is 100 kilogauss, which is about 10 Tesla, I think. And that the magnetic field due to the dissipation in the thermal effects are the same order of magnitude. Okay, and then down here it says, under these assumptions, with the same parameters used above, we obtain this magnetic field of 10 megagauss, and that is 1,000 Tesla. In 1975, published in 1976, using laser on nonlinear plasma. To introduce megagauss magnetic field at near the resonant absorption region. For laser fusion plasma, the hydrodynamic motion of the plasma modifies the density profile and hence the shape and amplitude of the magnetic field. Okay, so you've got hydrodynamics going on in here, and you've got the production of 1,000 Tesla magnetic fields. Where have we seen that before? We have seen that in this paper, which was sent to me, as I said, by one of the directors of Orion Energy here, and I published it as soon as I could afterwards, 5th of December 2021, and the paper here is the dynamics of moving electron vortices and magnetic ring in laser plasma interaction. Okay, and who didn't fund this? You have Ministry of Education, School of Physics and China. You have Shanghai, China. You have Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, California. You have Institute of Physics, Czech Republic. You have the Kansai Photon Science, Japan. You have Creation of New Photonics in Japan. You have Department of Physics, Strathclyde, United Kingdom. You have China again, and you have China. Okay, and it's funded by basically everyone. This is an international project, and you know what they came up with? They came up with typically 1,000 to 1,300 Tesla field, and down here we've got is proportional to the square root of laser power and approximately equals 2 times 10 to the 3 Tesla for laser parameters here. That's 2,000 Tesla. So the work which was published here in Plasma of Physics, and it was published on the 21st of April 2021, is essentially supporting the observations of this work, which was published in 1976. 1976. Same kind of field strengths, same dumping lasers into plasmas, because the lasers were much worse back then. All right? This is how slow things can go when you just have a few like highly funded labs and no one reads the papers, and unless people get the funding, it doesn't happen. But the speculation is that exotic vacuum objects self-organize to produce fields far in excess of these 2,000 Teslas or these 1,000 Teslas. Okay? And they are punching material through them. Okay? So what Bostick showed is these toroidal structures can come together into multiple toroidal structures. That is what Ken Shoulders said is an exotic vacuum object, or the toroidal structure itself, but also the multiple toroidal structures. And that is what gives rise to these anapoles and these toroidal moments. Now let's go back to our previous paper. So we are talking about this 1976 work published that had a rerun with a lot more serious players spending a lot more money and proving that they were right. 76, 86, 96, 2006, 2016. Oh my God, that's getting on for... Well, I mean, when this work was done, I was just 3 years old. I'm 50 years old. And they're finding that it does exactly the same thing that was established in 1976. Anyway, that aside. By alternately pulsing adjacent laser sets, the location of the merging processes can be made to oscillate back and forth at a desired rate. The amount of laser energy can be varied to alter the strength of the magnetic fields. Thus, by changing the laser's power and or wavelength and the pulse frequency, the resultant magnetic waveform can be changed or tuned to the desired harmonic of a distant space-time point. If flight to a nearby location is desired, the magnetic wave form can be continuously retuned, allowing very quick and short space-time transformations. For an observer, it would appear to be a smooth flight, in much the same way that we do not see individual frames of a film. This is exactly kind of what I'm saying. You're resonant here, you're resonant over there, because of your magnetohydrodynamic or hydromagnetic structure or electrodynamic structure, is this macro quantum object, in my view, and it can be here or it can be over here. Okay, and that is one frame you see, that is one frame you see. This is the quantization of the video frames, but in my view, it's the quantization of where you can exist in space-time. Okay, so blah 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 blah. For large jumps or travel to very distant spacetime points, some means of preventing the tuning to intermediate spacetime points is required. In the recent thesis work, it was shown that hydromagnetic waves can inhibit or enhance magnetic field line merging depending on a number of factors, including magnitude and frequency of the hydromagnetic waves. Thus, by generating the appropriate hydromagnetic waves, the generation of a coherent magnetic waveform can be prevented until the laser characteristics have been adjusted so as to generate the magnetic waveform, which is harmonic of the distant spacetime point. Then the hydromagnetic waves can be stopped and the magnetic waveform can develop. Okay, what does it look like? Dun da 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 da. What are you looking at there? What are you looking at that? What are you looking there? This is a current loop. And this, let's say, is a yin. This is a current loop, it's a yin. This is a current loop, it's a yin. This is a current loop, this is a yin. This is a current loop, it's a yin. This is a current loop. These are all of the same type. This is a cluster of the same structure. In 1979. Now, look at what happens to the merging of the magnetic field lines. Firstly, you get the flower of life in the center. Of course you would. So you've got it coming out from here and going down to here. Coming out from here, going down to here. Coming out from here, going down to here, right? But in the center, you can see that if you have all of these things of the same type, you get a line that comes into there, a line that comes into there, a line that comes into there, a line that comes into there. They're all going around in the same direction. And you know what they produce? A magnetic phase singularity in the center. A magnetic phase singularity in the center. You couldn't make it up. Okay, so this isn't so fractal. I mean, you could say that these are fractals, you know, so they're nearly there. They're nearly there in the concept, okay? But you can see how this could have been derived as a propulsion system from the work of Bostic. Now, bearing in mind, the paper that I showed you of Winston Bostic here, this one... Okay, so let's go back to the Guions with your regions of strong electric field strength are in simple toroidal Guion of zero angular momentum. This is not spinning. Stuff spins around it, but it's not spinning. Two waves of equal strength run around the torus in opposite directions to produce a standing wave. A standing wave with electric field strong in the regions indicated. These are electrical field structures. And magnetic field strong in the region between. Magnetic fields in between. The gravitational field created by this disturbance and required to hold the disturbance together is representable to a good approximation as a static and independent of azimuth. This is the gravitational field that binds it together. Now, published 1 year after the paper that we are talking about today, in 1980, by Bostic and Nardi, were these structures of the D4D ratio as I derived independently from 4 quantization levels with innies and outies. An outie there, an innie, there's an outie, there's an innie. And this is the same structure up from this at an angle, so you can see the core through the apple. And here is from the top, and then this is the structure with the 48 division up from the top, which I derived this structure from. Okay? Now, so you can see, though, that in the work of Winston Bostic, they actually had a hexagon in that paper, which I've just shown a segment from. And the hexagon produced these closed, two, around each face of the hexagon. I've got a hexagon somewhere around here. Anyway, as it's coming down, you get the two counter-rotating vortices coming down with the G vector going through it. They come and they form loops, and the loops form a loop-de-loop. A loop-de-loop. And that's essentially what you are seeing here. So I'm pretty certain that the other papers, in combination with the Winston Bostic work, gave them the inspiration for these things. And this is, of course, back in 1957, Winston Bostic was saying that we could probably get to Mars in 4 hours using, or I think it was 4 hours off the top of my head, using this technology, if properly implemented. But that was more of a propulsion drive. But what I'm looking at here is something that has a flower of life in the center. It's got 6 things around the side, and the magnetic merging of field lines results in a vortex in the center. And that is why I produced this lovely picture here for your viewing. And, you know, we have our 2 arms of the spiral galaxy coming in, because I'm saying you need a minimum of 2 for this to work, to create the structure, as we have seen in various experiments. Okay. So, thank you to the person that sent me this. Did someone own up to sending this to me? I don't know if someone owned up to sending this to me, but you can kind of see that from the field fixed lines here, not the ones that are going around the whole of the current structures, but the fixed field lines. If that you take that diameter, it's about a D4D ratio across this overall structure. But this, my friends, you know, this is not no one. This is NASA, having studied but Winston Bostick's work, the ability of lasers to produce 1,000 plus Tesla magnetic toroids, potentially that would lead to fusion technology, and combining alpha waves and black holes, and having studied the properties of UFOs, and it's just like matter of fact in here. It's hilarious. The high-speed, right-angle turns, abrupt stops or accelerations of UFOs, and the absence of sonic booms, blah, blah, blah. These are all the things they're talking about today. It's like, it's not new. And this is what they propose, which isn't, in my view, sufficiently fractal toroidal enough to create a pure... Well, I mean, this is getting close to producing a macro quantum object. You kind of need to get these and do what they are doing here. So if I play this, so you've got your current loop, and you've got your current loop here. So what they're actually producing is the first toroidal moment. So in fact, they're accurate. They're accurate. So they didn't know what to call it back in 1979 because Dubovik wasn't the brilliance of his work, and bless him, I hope he's still alive to see this. Dubovik, he worked this out in 1965, a full decade and a half before they were coming up with this. But they are creating in here a toroidal moment. That is what that is here, and that is what that is here. So it's able to interact with dark matter, and it can cohere that into the vortex here at the magnetic center. And because this is bound together by a gravitational vector, what is gravity? I'm arguing that gravity is because of interaction of the toroidal moment with relic neutrino clusters. Okay? And the toroidal moment can interact with the toroidal moment of the relic neutrinos and clusters thereof, or axions if you'd like to call clusters of relic neutrinos. Okay? And condense them in. And if that's the case, it is completely in alignment with the claim of John Archibald Wheeler, that this is a gravitational azimuth that holds this structure together. Okay? I rest my case. Anyway, they go on. They don't stop there. The medium in which the magnetic field line merging occurs, vacuum, ionized gas, etc., energy storage requirements, the pumping mechanism for the lasers, and crew control interfaces are currently being studied. In 1979. To avoid large energy storage requirements, magnetic pumping of the lasers may be utilized to allow the reuse of a portion of the laser energy which is otherwise radiated. It may also be possible to obtain substantial energy during the initial part of the process of tuning to a new space-time point. Look at that. It may also be possible to obtain substantial energy during the initial part of the process of tuning to a new space-time point through the resonance with gravitational fields. By allowing the craft to continuously shift or oscillate to new nearby space-time points, or a continual supply of energy could be obtained while in hovering mode. The oscillation could be accomplished by the modulation of magnetic field line merging by adjusting hydromagnetic wave parameters. This technique would provide energy for the lasers without disrupting major laser retuning processes. The outer shape of the proposed spacecraft is a winged disc. See figure 4. Oh, we've got another figure, guys. The wings would be used for testing purposes only and could later be eliminated following sufficient testing. Based on something that someone said in 1963. Research required. The magnetic field line merging process and the effects of varying associated parameters requires extensive study. Specific laboratory tests should be conducted, some of which could be conducted in association with fusion research, because they're related. These tests should be supplemented by computer modeling studies and the collection of experimental data and magnetic field configurations of hydromagnetic wave fluctuations before and after solar flares and geomagnetic storms. Well, thankfully, they've done it now in 21st of April 2021. So thank you to the authors of that paper that have finally done the work, at least on that aspect. The generation of mega-Gauss magnetic fields by high-powered lasers and the effects of varying laser parameters should be studied in laboratory experiments. Yep, I think so. Blah, blah, blah. Much of the research could be accomplished in association, blah, 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 blah. The pumping, extensive measurements of the radiation emitted. Here we go. Extensive measurements of the radiation emitted by UFOs would be extremely useful in gaining insight into the physics and technology UFOs may represent. Okay, so let's just go and study our UFOs. But we don't have any. Oh, no. You just need to have some extensive measurements of the radiation emitted by UFOs. Okay, so let's just monitor these things. Monitor these things that don't exist. Okay, all right. Gotcha. These measurements should include photographic spectra using special filters for cameras, magnetic measurements using high-sensitivity detectors, recording of radio and sound frequencies, and the use of Geiger counters to detect high-energy particles. A large distribution of special detectors, as described above, should be made to UFO investigators, police departments, and other interested individuals. In addition, portable modules containing sophisticated detectors should be located at strategic positions in various countries to allow rapid transport to high-activity areas. It's so matter of fact. So, Alien Scientist, thank you for joining us. Thunderbolt, thank you for joining us. This has been done. Paul Murad talked about this at one of the first APEC conferences. Well, there we go. Effects on minerals, plants, animals, and humans should be studied and gain insight into the radiation emitted by UFOs. Well, we have been doing that. We have potentially produced shielding, which ironically is based on display technology used by Tesla in the late part of the 1800s to show projections of his dark light, his etheric matter streams that came through walls and projected his bones onto zinc sulfide screens. And so it's based on that. Shishkin developed the screening technologies to help us protect ourselves from the emissions. But it's only really a moderation. It doesn't solve the problem entirely. Effects on humans such as burns, symptoms of radiation sickness, or other bodily changes should be thoroughly investigated by physicians. Well, the Russians have done a lot of work on this field already. We're well ahead of the game. But then I would hope we would be ahead of the game because this was in 1979. Regressive hypnosis should be used extensively to obtain technologically valuable information from UFO close encounter participants. This is very wise words. Listen to what I'm going to say at the end of this presentation because something fun's going to be happening in a few days' time. 3-dimensional models of exterior and interior of UFOs should be made for cases which are significant from a technological point of view. Oh, here we go. Here's the ship. Oh, doesn't this look familiar? This definitely looks familiar. Never seen something this shape before. Nope. No, definitely never seen something this shape before. No. It kind of looks familiar and then it doesn't. Kind of looks familiar and then it doesn't. As soon as some of the basic interactions are better understood, or after a thorough review of state-of-the-art hydromagnetic interactions is completed, small-scale test models of the propulsion system and spacecraft should be constructed and extensive testing performed. The testing should be proceed hand in hand with the results of other research. Several test models may need... Look at this. Several test models may be needed in case one or two are lost, in inverted commas. Final comments. Since the field resonance concept utilizes 2 unproven assumptions, the thing about jumping space-time and stuff, and currently unverified magnetohydrodynamic processes, which I think probably we've got close to verifying, and certainly this helps. Where is it? The concept is likely to require extensive modification and perhaps a complete revamping following initial research activity and subsequent feasibility studies. I am confident, however, that the research accomplished under the motivation of this or similar propulsion concept will result in theoretical and technological advances and ultimate breakthroughs in propulsion and energy systems. There we go. There is your references. That was field resonance propulsion concept by NASA from 1979. And there we go. Let's study all of those UFOs we have access to learn what we need to know to simulate what they do. Because what they do, we already know, and it's already documented in this document from 1979. Okay? And the structure that they say is going to do it is something that they could not even recognize because they didn't know the electrodynamics at the time. This is a toroidal moment structure. Yes, it was described by John Archibald Wheeler in 1954, okay, in Physical Review. Yes, it was observed by Winston Bostick, who, by the way, was working on the US National Fusion Project, and plasmoids came out of that, so it's not surprising that they are saying they should work hand in hand with fusion researchers. And obviously, John Archibald Wheeler worked on the Manhattan Project, and he was Feynman's tutor. And yes, John Hutchison was using Tesla type equipment and electromagnetic waves, and he did produce these things, which are real, which is how I got down this rabbit hole. They can be uber fractal like this, 4848, but they can be minimally fractal down to the 2-2, the 2-2, the lots of 2-2s, the 2-2, which is a superconducting loop, okay? And they can be anything in between, like the 4-4 here, which is our wind hex, which produces the pseudomagnetic monopole, which has been shown and verified. And they can be any number of subdivisions around up to, in my view, 48. Okay? And moreover, they don't need to be the first fractal. They don't need to be the first toroidal moment. They can be hypertoroidal or hypertoroidal, as they call them, which I call fractal toroidal. Okay? So there we go. Now, I'll take some questions now, if there are any questions. And then I've got a little bonus round at the end before we talk about what's going to happen later in the week. So, do you have any questions? Are monopoles portals? If you have a paired monopole, possibly. Or rather, if you have a yin and a yang, it would appear that these might be the black hole and the white hole. And that the yin will compress, and potentially, if you're already in a coherent matter, if you're already in a bubble structure like this, you are effectively protected, and maybe that can be compressed by another larger fractal toroidal structure, and its pair, its yang, can be at a distance some way away, you know, maybe a couple of light years away or a couple of galaxies away, and you go through the wormhole having been shrunk, but because you're in your own quantum object, it's just shrinking your space-time, but everything is relative. And then you travel through the wormhole and come out the other side, and it reconstructs you because it's the yang of the yin. They are exactly equivalent and resonant partners to it. It's like one's a transmitter and one's a receiver, and they can only transmit. They are effectively coupled. They are quantum entangled. Okay? There's still people debating whether there's the ability to create a pseudo monopole. Well, there is. You can create it. It's been done. You know, some people call it an electromagnetic knot. Some people say that is what causes ball lightning. But that is what does this, and you can see it here. These are the spots that they create there's a vortex structure in the center here. This is the spot. This is the spot, and it's got a phase singularity. And at that point, everything's coming in, and it doesn't know which way to go, and it's basically cohered at that point. So yeah, there we go. And when you break down this structure from the actual work, you end up with the birdie structures. Where are we? We've got the birdie structures somewhere here, which much of the Russian researchers found. So here, these birdies, that is a slice through an exploding monopole type structure, and the monopole is at this point, and that's it's in the different orientation to the ones here. So these are south monopoles. They're pushing the stuff in, and this is these are north monopoles. There's 3 north monopoles here, 2 north here, 2 north. So you can see how they can cluster together. Anyway, that's what we know. So. So, Dr. DIY Projects with Chelsea says, Bob, you heard on Dr. Ningley? Maybe I did. I kind of think I did. Don't know. Okay, so Alien Science says, you mentioned 2x2 and 4x4. Do you ever get odd numbers like, yes, you can have 3x3. And in fact, so like, where is it? We have seen on the outskirts of a ball lightning structure. So where you've got ball lightning, you've got a lot of these things coherent. Okay, in a ball lightning cut in a copper pipe of Henk urine, slightly a few microns away from that on the uncut copper pipe, there are pits where we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We didn't have 7 in that particular area, and 8 arranged around and I will talk about this in my applications of the fractal toroidal moment presentation at this year's ICCF in Szczecin in Poland. And you can go and see this if you look at the live microscope session recordings of the Amasa vibrator plate around one of the big yin-yang structures, one of the cavitation structures on those steel plates. There is a smaller yin-yang, which is 2 pits, and it's got the carbon deposits that accompany these things regularly. There is 2 triangular holes. So each of the pits isn't a round pit, it's a triangular hole. So this implies the n-1 fractal level to have 2, and the n-2 fractal level to have 3 around it. And so I have every reason to expect that you can have. I think I get the feeling it needs to be balanced. So, for instance, if you've got something on the opposite side here, so like, I would suspect that if this is 1 and you had 3 around this, then each of the ones below that, the subtor below that, would need to say have 2 or 3 or whatever. They might need to all be the same, or it might be the opposite ones need to be the same for balance. I suspect at each subtor level, like, so, this is the main tor, this is the n tor, these are the subtors, so this is the n-1 tor. If there were only 3 of these around here, you could have each of those 3 have 2n-2 tors, so just 2 in the structure. But when you've got that, they arrange slightly differently, it would seem. So yes, you can have odd, and you can have even combinations of. Well, actually, the one that I referred to was it was an even 2, and then it was 3. So you can have even and odd. What are the poles? What is the polarity? So you basically get I've gone through this in a different presentation, but you have phase up phase out and phase down, but in the center you have like all phase pointing in, and that makes it a monopole. And typically they're a phase singularity. So and I will talk about this in my, again, I'll reiterate, I will talk about this in my presentation at Stettin. But I guess the most important phase singularity one that you can easily look for, if you go on my blog at remoteview.icu here, and you type in Shack, if I could spell it right, Paranov. I've got an equals in that. It's definitely not that. Shack Paranov. There we go. So Shack Paranov's work used a Mobius strip. And a Mobius strip with copper effectively on one side, because it only has one side, it's a Mobius strip, produces a phase singularity. And one is a yin and one is a yang. So the yin is the mother. And so the yin in this phase singularity here is pulling all forms of energy out of this space-time over here. And it's extracting that, producing a zero albedo structure, which can be moved around or whatever, depending on the projection, the orientation of the phase structure here. And it pulls the energy in. So this is yin. Yin needs to take energy from the environment and create something in its center. Okay, this is yang. So yang is able to break things apart in its center and project the energy out into fast space time. Okay, and with either of these, you can, trigger earthquakes or volcanoes and, weather systems and stuff. These are, but this is, as I've said in the past, this is the basis for how the Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower worked. And I believe that Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was a basic yin structure using the cone, the Sothic ratio cone, and the energy extraction zone was below ground, and it pulled energy up, and it possibly synthesized straight electromagnetic waves, or even potentially synthesized electrons in its core. And so it was an energy generator extracting the hidden energy within matter. So there we go. That's what that was doing. A polariton is there's many different polaritons, and they are ways to potentially create coherent matter and phase relationships between things. So like there are many ways to create these monopole like structures, but I kind of like things that I can see the results. And Shack Paranov works, you can't maybe replicate it, but it exists, and it's able to do this extraction at a distance. Now, some of the work talks about a cone that comes out with a vortex of things going into the cone or coming out of it or whatever, and the cone is almost exactly the Sothic ratio cone. And so for me, it's very, very likely the same thing. So, by using this type of technology, you might be able to fake a glowing orb traveling around in free space, or a black object traveling around in free space. And so you could fake a UFO using this technology. And so that's just a shame that can be done, because, anyway, they've got to deal with these things. And I don't know why these people that get so much airtime aren't aware of this research. It's not like it isn't public for a very long time. So I don't know why. It seems a little bit odd to me. Maybe they do know about it. They just don't want to talk about it, because this is a relatively simple experiment to do in theory. Of course, it's always much more complicated when you try. Anyway, the most important thing about any experiment for a replicator is it real and is it possible? Your incompetence may not make it possible for you, but it doesn't mean it isn't possible. So Odd1X says, hi Bob, I'm building an app, and if it takes off, my dream is to single-handedly fund MFMP wildly. That is a lovely dream, and may I share with you your dream and wish it all his success. Okay. All right. Yin. Okay. I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions I missed, which I probably did. But anyway, I just want to talk about two things to close out. So, when I went to visit Takaaki Matsumoto, and thank you for the people that helped support that. If I hadn't taken that, if I hadn't been able to take an opportunity to go and see him, and if I hadn't taken the very first opportunity to go and see him, the other two opportunities he had already have gone. So again, this life lesson of when you have an opportunity, take it, do it, try and make it work. If it doesn't work, at least you tried. You don't want to be that person thinking coulda, shoulda, woulda. Anyway, so when I arrived, I met Sho in Sapporo Airport, and we got on the train, and he told me that Dr. Matsumoto was feeling really rather ill and may not be able to see us. I said, okay, all right, well, we'll see what we can do. We'll, we're here now, so let's see if we can make a thing happen. I said, but if nothing happens, there's two things I'd really like to do. One is I would like to go to any ancient temples because I want to understand what is important in the spiritual context for Japanese people and what symbology and what belief structures and stuff. And I also wanted to go to a thermal spa because I wanted to understand, limestone deposition and potentially methods for creating geopolymers. And these kind of things are concepts that, well, certainly in the case of the latter, that Matsumoto engages with in some of his work. And so I wanted to experience what might have inspired him. And so I thought, right, if we can't spend all of our time with him, we will not waste time. We'll do what we can to prepare to be with him and maybe go and do these other things. He says, well, I'm very sorry, but on the idea of going to see some ancient temples here, which, by the way, have the auspicious symbol as their mark on the map, he said that I'm afraid Hokkaido Island is pretty new to Japan in that it had these native aboriginals that were living there until about 450 years ago, and the samurai came in and did a ethnic cleanse of them, slaughtered them all, and the Japanese nation took on that island. So they don't have any ancient temples in Hokkaido. I thought, oh, well, that is disappointing. So then we decided to go and see the place of these Aboriginal peoples, and we learnt a lot from them. For instance, that they have the thunderbolt as the symbol of power on their clothing of war, and that was just interesting to see that so shortly after seeing the double epsilon being the key symbol of Delphi, and that being related to the thunderbolt in ancient lore around the world and symbol of great power. Anyway, so he was telling me about this temple as kind of like a compensatory thing that he had visited near his hometown in Osaka. And this is one of the most famous temples, and he had actually deliberately gone there to, I guess, get some peace and thinking for seeing Dr. Matsumoto. And he had got some souvenirs, these kind of like tea things made in glutinous rice, which are popular as gifts, but he got it from this most famous temple near Osaka where he lives, and he wanted these as gifts to give to Dr. Matsumoto and his family, and also to his friend who he was seeing there. And actually, because we couldn't go to the temple and couldn't see Matsumoto initially, he did arrange to see his friend. And his friend came round, and I was talking about, how I got involved with this, and when I was talking historically a number of years back with Show, and I was saying, look, I think these symbols that they have around the wrists of the Sumerian gods are very important, because they're not just there, they're all over the ancient world. And some people call them chrysanths, and what I'm referring to is this type of flower structure here, which is in the right place in the center of what would be the kind of wind hex structure, with the quadskelion here, with the pair vortices here. And to answer your question again, here, alien scientist, this representation shows a pair, but is a quad, making the n level. So you have an n level, and the n-1 has a pair. So the pair is the minimum at any level. But I think to be balanced, you always have to have the same at the sub-Tor levels. So this is kind of what I was trying to argue earlier, because of the way, I guess, they feed into each other or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, this was the thing that I was referring to. And so, and I said that this is related, the most advanced one is like this, and this is because the flying disk of the sky gods on the Sumerian stele, it would appear, has 48, and I've got some incredibly beautiful photos that I took in the London British Museum that I will share at another time. But you do get other ones of different numbers of cluster structures, subcluster structures. Okay, so I thought the fact that they have these so-called flower representations in different levels is not surprising, because they do form in different levels. Okay, so I was saying that I said to Show, and even this structure is on the Japanese passport. And Show said, yes, okay, so great. Okay, so that's where we were. And I was recounting this story to Show's friend in the first or second evening that we were there. And I wanted to show him this, and I came to this image and I clicked on it, and it turns out that this is the imperial standard of the Emperor of Japan, and that is why it is found on the Japanese passport. And so, I was thinking, oh, well, that's interesting. And so what happened was, as I was scrolling down this page, blah 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 blah. La la la, and I came to this bit, and I thought, oh, the 3 sacred treasures. What are the 3 sacred treasures? What is the 3 sacred treasures? Well, they are these: this object, and the other one. So, what are these 3 sacred treasures? Okay, well, one is called the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. And if we look at this, the Kusanagi no Tsurugi is a legendary Japanese sword, and one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan. It was originally called Ame no Marakumo no Tsurugi, which means, you can't make this up, guys, heavenly sword of gathering clouds. That's right, it's the heavenly sword of gathering clouds, right? Because when I saw this, I saw a pattern, okay? This is our caduceus spiral, the sword that we see when the ball lightning hit on sideways on the Henk Vega anode silicon dioxide sheath. This is the caduceus spiral that comes down, which is the center of the vortex of the tornado. And the sword here, original name, is the heavenly sword of gathering clouds. So I thought, well, that is a little bit strange, right? Okay. So what is the next thing? Well, the next thing is the Yata no Kagami. And this is some mirror, but it has this form suggested. Okay. And we will go into that in a little while. The last bit is this Magatama. And these things are very popular in Japan. And there are very many of them. And you can see here in different pieces of jade and stuff. But when I saw this, I just literally couldn't believe that these three things were like this. These three things. Because it may not be obvious to you, but it's obvious to me. Okay, so let me just do something here. Just give me a second. I need to close this down, otherwise it's going to overheat. And I need to load up Photoshop. And this is my little bit of crazy for tonight. The new name for this, by the way, for the new name is actually, but its name was later changed to the more popular blah 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 grass cutting sword. Grass cutting sword. No, sorry, I prefer the original name, Heavenly Sword of Gathering Clouds. I really do prefer the original name. I think that's a much better name for what this is. Right. So you have to bear with me for a second or two. I didn't prepare this part of the presentation. I didn't know whether I'd want to do it. But I do now. Why am I in here? I shouldn't be in here. Okay. Let's try something else here. Right, this image normally breaks my computer because it's so complicated. And hopefully I have everything lined up. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So, we'll have a look at our sacred geometry here. And hopefully I've got it in the right place. I don't know whether I have. Acc No Gogami. Right. Well, I think the first thing we need to look at here is our yin yang. So we'll bring in the yin yang. Where's the yin yang? Give me a yin yang. Give me a yin yang. Okay. So, okay. Well, we have. No, it's all a bit of a mess because I've got something there. Give me a second. Should have prepared this. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have our aluminium foil with our yin-yang structure on there, and the yin-yang perfectly fits. Okay, so that is our yin and yang, and in this particular one, inside the central vortex, inside the Vesica Pisces, inside the golden ratio line, you have birthed here this structure here with our boron, no calcium. Inside the Vesica Pisces, inside the golden ratio line, you have calcium with not totally calcium, but you have some calcium in here with no boron, and boron is aluminium minus oxygen, and the calcium, some isotopes, are aluminium plus oxygen. Okay, so you have the breaker here and the maker. This is the male, this is the female, this is the yang, this is the yin. Okay, that is what we are looking at there. Right, so what do we have? I don't even know if these are lined up. We'll see. Kind of need to turn off a couple of layers, so maybe we can go. I'll go here, maybe. Right. Let's see. First up is our Acc No Kagami. And there we go. The Acc No Kagami is absolutely perfect. Not the outside part, but the center point, the central structure here, this part of it, this area here. So if we go back to our one over here, you can see where the central part is, and the yin yang, and this one here, and we go back here, boom. Okay, now the Magatama is there, and so if we actually put in our structure here, and then I turn on the Magatama, oh, it's actually below. It would be below, wouldn't it? Okay, give me a sec. I'll put the Magatama up here so it will appear above, hopefully. Oh no, it's in the wrong place. Come on, Magatama. Okay, let me put the Magatama. Give me a second. Really should have done this beforehand. Poor planning, Bob. I think you can see where it should go. And then when you learn what the Magatama is, you'll know. It should be there. Right, come on. Where are we? Not there. There. Is it there? Where has it gone? Why is it not there? Okay, I don't know what's going on here. Let me go there. Right, and then we bring in... Sorry. This has got about 1 million slides. Right, okay, so you can see here. Maybe you can see. If I go and add another slide there, and then we'll just go like that, right? So... Okay, can you see that the Magatama is the exact shape of the structure that forms inside the golden ratio line and where the spiral vortex ends up? Okay, now what is the Magatama? Okay, what is the Magatama? Okay, there's a whole lot of mythology behind this. And so what I'm saying actually, by the way, is that the sword would be like the caduceus spiral that comes down here. So I haven't shown this before, but we'll show it here now. Why not? And the caduceus is here. That's where your caduceus spiral is, comes down. This is the symbolic version of the caduceus spiral, which is exactly, precisely lines up with the center points. This is actually on other Macedonian coins. So I showed the thunderbolt, but on other Macedonian coins, they have this form of the caduceus representation, which shows the baseline of the Sothic triangle, the central circle, and the circle that goes into the center of the two spin vortices. Okay, so this is kind of what I imagine the sword is, and its description, its original description as the heavenly sword of gathering clouds is this heavenly sword of gathering clouds, because this is where the tornado comes up. Okay, so it is exactly correct. I haven't lined that object up. Anyway, so let's look at these things. So the imperial regalia here. According to legend, these treasures were brought to Earth by Ninigi no Mikoto, legendary ancestor of the Japanese imperial line, when his grandmother, the sun goddess Amaterasu sent him to pacify Japan. These treasures were eventually said to be passed down to Emperor Jimmu, who was the first emperor of Japan and was also Ningi's great-grandson. Traditionally, they were a symbol of the emperor's divinity as a descendant of Amaterasu, confirming his legitimacy as the paramount ruler of Japan. So, the story here, I think it's better described here, maybe. No, okay, so there are various ways to describe this, but the story that is described here is the story that was told to me on the train by Sho when he was saying we possibly couldn't see Matsumoto, but he'd gone to this temple and he described the story about this great goddess and stuff. So it was just weird how everything lined up, that just like that evening or the following evening I was talking about this so-called chrysanthemum and ended up at this story from a completely different route. So it's basically when Amaterasu hid in the cave from her brother Susanoo. I'm going to mull at all these names, I'm sorry. No Mikoto, thus plunging the world into darkness. The goddess Ame no Uzumi no Mikoto hung the mirror and jewels outside the cave. The jewels are the Magatama outside the cave and lured her out of the cave, at which point she saw her own reflection and was startled enough to that the gods could extract her. Susanoo later presented the sword to Kusanagi to Amaterasu as a token of an apology. He obtained it from the body of an 8-headed serpent. At the conclusion, now basically the Magatama in this myth, what this god Amaterasu did when she got the Magatama, she was able with the Magatama to create new gods. So she threw them out and created new gods. So the thing that is created at the center of this vortex, this Magatama type structure, in my view, has the ability to be the creator of gods, according to the Japanese legend. But when you go into the grandson that actually came down with these regalia, it says here, according to Japanese mythology, as the great-grandfather of Japan's first emperor, the 3 sacred treasures brought with Ningi from heaven and divine ancestry established the Japanese imperial family. Ningi was born from this person and blood this person and treated him with special affection and nurtured him. Ningi's descent to Earth appears in both the Nihon Shoki and the Kojiki. In an earlier version of the Nihon Shoki, Ningi descends to Earth unaccompanied. But in later versions, other gods accompany. So basically, this guy descends from the gods, from heavens, from space to Earth to start the Japanese royal family and to look after the Japanese people. So he is a sky god, and he brings with him what I would call the symbols of the god's toolbox. The Magatama, the Yata no Kagami, and the heavenly sword of gathering clouds. So I believe, in my view, that I was given this gift on my, I think it was the first night in Japan, trying to explain this structure here, the chrysanthemum. It led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole to find these things, which I believe are the structure that you see here. And you have that these 3 structures here, and I haven't put the sword in, but you can work out where it is. Now where is the other one? Yata no Kagami. There we go. Yata no Kagami. I mean, otherwise they were just very good at guessing this. You know, why did they choose these ratios? I don't know. Like, why would you choose that ratio? Don't know. Okay. Anyway, there we go. So, does anyone have any questions on my little bit of crazy tonight? I'm going to quit Photoshop now, so I'm not going to save that. So you'll have to hold that image in your head. I will publish these associated images in the blog. Hi, Squirrel Sniper. Hi, Dan Moretti. Hi, System Automation. So... Standish says, any owl experiences in Japan? Well, clearly you must have missed reading my blog. And this is before I mentioned the owls that we had come across in the owls that had come across in Delphi. But Delphi finished 2 days before I was in Japan. I had to squeeze it in because I felt I needed to go there beforehand. But if you look at the blogs from Matsumoto, yeah, the first restaurant we went into, it was just absurd. It was basically owls everywhere. It was just comical. Just really, really comical. Where are we? Okay. And in fact, it's the owl is the symbol of the native peoples of that island, of Hokkaido Island. You could not make this up. So, I called it Matsumoto Ainu, and then the Ainu are the traditional people, the people there. And we went to the thing, and at this place, at this spa that we went to, like there was owls everywhere on the first day in the restaurant that we went to on the first night, just after we arrived, right? So we went out and got some food before we could go to a supermarket, okay, just to get some food. There were owls everywhere in the restaurant, so that was a bit freaky, having just come from Delphi. And then we go to this spa. To look at the potential for geopolymers. And as I'm walking up the stairs into the spa, there's the mother of all carved wood owls, and it's winking at me. and then we see the symbol. This is the symbol of the Ainu people, which is an owl, which is also the vortex structure, by the way. And outside of the center for the Ainu people was an owl. And in there, their clothing is owls with Maltese crosses and a vortex symbol at the bottom, which is basically an inverted owl, right? And this is the monopole, the yin one way and the yang the other way, okay? And then they have, not only do they have the flower structure in the Aboriginal structure, with that, they also have the yin-yang. And they have a spherical structure which has these so-called flowers arranged around it, making the bowl, right? Okay? There's the yin-yang. Here you've got the owl with the sun and the moon symbols, of course, the yin and the yang. And you have the thunderbolt here. The thunderbolt here, these are bands that they wore as warriors, with your vortex up and your vortex down. This is the same vortex up and vortex down that you see around the frieze of the Parthenon in Greece. Here we go. Again. Your Vritra. Your thunderbolt. Here, in Aboriginal people. Here, you've got your vortex structures. It's literally everywhere on pretty much all of their artwork. So yes, and the symbol of their entire peoples, these Aboriginal peoples, is the owl. So did I see any Japans in Japan? Did I see any owls? I couldn't not see them. They were literally everywhere from the first time we sat down to, you know, and all of the other symbols. It was a weird spiritual exercise going to Hokkaido. It really was. After leaving Delphi and thinking, this is literally all over the world. This is literally all over the world. Is this the tool for the of the craft? Yes. It's what we are trying to build. Okay. All right, so before I do a review, I just want to say I'm going with Yin Gazda, former confidant of John Hutchison, to this conference in France called Rencontre Galactique, which is specifically about people that have gone through what is recommended in that document here, this document here, reverse sort of hypnosis. Several of these people are UFO experiencers who have been taken away on UFOs or whatever. And we also have Dan Winter and apparently Chris Esson, who is apparently someone who knows a lot about or has some good ideas about how UFOs are propelled. And of course, you all know and love Dan Winter and fractalfield.com and all of his other websites and products, including Therify and so forth. So I'm looking forward to having a little bit of time with them. And so literally this paper tells us that we need to go to experiences of and people that have been on UFOs. And I got this paper after I had agreed to go to this conference with Yin Gazda, and it's a little bit weird. I have to say, it's almost like I can't do it. Just the progression of things is exactly as it needs to be at every stage. Okay, so just to refresh, today we talked Ode Galactica, and I speculated that the story behind Battlestar Galactica, where the people of the Cobol colonies, the 12 colonies of Cobol, created artificial intelligence battle bots and then created hominid-type automatons. These are creatures that look and act like humans, but were actually artificial intelligence creatures. They used them as slaves and as workers, and ultimately they created their own god, these Cylons, and they decided that they didn't want to be enslaved anymore, and that it was their duty to either assimilate or annihilate the human race, their makers. And they did a very good job of killing billions of all humans in the Cobol 12 colonies, but there was 50,000 that escaped on Battlestar Galactica here, and the Cylons pursued them through the cosmos on their way to the mythical Earth, where the 13th tribe had been lost, apparently. When they arrived there, apparently this 13th tribe was actually created AI creatures themselves and had annihilated themselves, and that was that. And they were Cylons anyway. So, and they had to go off and find somewhere else. So that is the story, and I'm asking, when you literally have the Epsilon team using the symbol of Delphi saying that they have secret knowledge of extraterrestrial origin, and this is thousands of years old society that have this knowledge based on this thunderbolt imagery, which is the structure of ball lightning, which is the secret to all this technology. They are saying that they are a race that came to Earth. And there are other races that came to Earth, and they cite the Hebrew race, and that they've been unfriendly for a while, but they've been competitors. But you can imagine that if they were two groups of people fleeing from somewhere else because they were pursued by an artificial intelligence creature that they created themselves, then you have the Japanese here. Are the Japanese, their leader, their emperor was supposedly from god lineage and came down to look after the peoples of Japan. Were they also a group that came to Earth? And in fact, when Ben what was his name, Rich, whatever his name is, if I get the name wrong, that's the guy from Lockheed Martin, said we now have the technology to take ET back home. Was he referring to us as being ETs, and where is home? Is that the place we last created AI technology? And am I saying, is this all a little bit of history repeating? So that's my game of the presentation tonight. And so I referred through to the technology here, the quadskeleton, the structure that is most basically represented by the superconducting loop here that produces the two left and right yin-yang structure that produces this toroidal moment that comes down here that's twisted this copper oxide out here and disrupted the electron bonds in the copper oxide. And here is the structure on an X-ray, and here's another one, and here's the other orientation. This is a much bigger version, and this is the overall structure, and this is the basics that you need to create a toroidal moment. It's the absolute minimum, but this is the same as John Archibald Wheeler's Geons, and that extended through to the NADI work from the fusion research. And basically, NADI was essentially using disruptive discharges as designed by Tesla without mentioning him, but doing it to deuterated titanium electrodes and putting multiple of those over a magnetic field where they formed a toroid of toroids. And they eventually came up with these structures in 1980 with a D4D ratio. I decoded these from the Hutchison sample and came up with this structure. And ultimately, they can be different fractal levels, but they produce a phase singularity in the center, and that produces a pseudo-magnetic monopole, which is able to gather and interact with dark matter in the form of weakly interacting massive particles, clusters thereof of relic neutrinos and relic neutrinos, and that is the gravitational vector of the Geons, which binds them together, and we found the physical embodiments of them, and that led to understanding the toroidal moment. And then that led us to understanding that the work conducted here on a intergalactic propulsion system and presented to NASA in the middle of 1979, and based on work from as early as 1963, and also clearly from the work of Bostic, absolutely clearly, because it's talking about the work that's coming out of fusion research, and it literally draws basically the electromagnetic structure of the latter day versions of Wystan Bostic's work. And this is a first order toroidal moment structure, which they didn't understand what it was, but John Archibald Wheeler had already worked out that it had a gravitational moment through the center. And you can see here from the magnetic line reconnections here, and the fact that it produces a vortex in the center, and this is exactly what we observe in physical embodiments as observed in the Lion reactor. And this is the symbol of my remote-view.icu blog. For that very reason, it is the O, this is the O, this is the O of the O's, and it should be as above, so below. Okay, and they say that this is something that could be used and explored for intergalactic flight. And they reference work from 1976, which produced 1,000 Tesla fields in it. And this was then replicated in internationally funded research by literally every major continent on Earth in this work. And they replicated and found typically 1,000 to 1,300 Tesla, but maximally up to 2,000 Tesla here. So it's of the same order of magnitude, but we know that we get far higher intensities from the calculations of plasmoids by other researchers. But there we go. So this is a real thing that has been done. And then I just went through my little bit of crazy looking at the regalia of the Japanese gods that came down to be the emperors of Japan and their meaning. And you should really look into the mythology around this and the importance of the Magatamas and the fact that they are able to create new gods. And I'm saying that this is God's toolbox, and that the center of the structure, for instance, in the pyramid, it creates the food of the gods. And so that could create the gods, because they get, God consciousness and whatever. And so, yeah, that's that. And then we are going to do exactly what was recommended in this paper here. and that is to do what they call regression. And it says here something blah 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 on doing regression on somewhere here. It says on doing studies on people that have experienced. Okay. So thank you very much for your time this evening. It was really spooky to have been. You can see here that I've got the field structure in here from that 1979 paper, but they didn't know or refer to this as a toroidal moment. But that is what they are suggesting is the tool to access intergalactic drive. I have argued that the toroidal moment is able to extract the hidden energy within matter as per that declassified in 2017 1992 CIA report. And they said that is the same thing as cold fusion, and they said that using a kilo of iron, the system that will extract the energy from the iron, which is hidden within it, is the same thing that will be the propulsion, and 1 kilo of iron will be able to get, using the overall device, to Alpha Centauri in 6 years. The system basically generates the energy on the fly, and they are suggesting that in this paper that was presented by NASA, the energy for producing the lasers and for producing the field containments that are necessary could be produced. This is exactly what was said in 1992, and they are saying it's the same thing as cold fusion. And the hidden energy within matter, I am arguing, is the relic neutrino condensates that maintain the electron spin relationship with the nucleus. I'm agreeing with the arguments of Shishkin and Dubovik, the person that established the toroidal moment in 1965, and Kurol's, and that this magnetotoroelectrical radiation, as they call it, the neutral clusters, is that the etheric matter that Tesla extracted from preferentially beryllium, magnesium, or aluminium in the turn of 1900, and that led to the effects, which I believe was what led him to do a lot of the funky stuff that confused so many other people, because they can't see that this thing exists. So, you know, they're already at a disadvantage. So this was O Day Galactica. My name is Bob Greenyer. Thank you for joining me this 17th of July 2023. I think we are definitely getting into a position where we can start considering taking ET back home, and we don't have to ask certain military organizations for permission to do it. It's public knowledge. Thank you very much for your time. I'll see you in the next video. Dobre noc. Buenas noches. Good night.